We referenced some mixed messages from the White House over how it might pay for the wall. It started with Mr. Trump's speech to the Republican policy gathering in Philadelphia.
We're working on a tax reform bill that will reduce our trade deficits, increase American exports, and will generate revenue from Mexico that will pay for the wall if we decide to go that route.
What would that tax look like? Press Secretary Sean Spicer explained it would be a 20% tax on imports from Mexico.
Using comprehensive tax reform as a means to tax imports from countries that we have a trade deficit from, like Mexico, $50 billion at 20% of imports. By doing it that way, we can do $10 billion a year and easily pay for the wall just through that mechanism alone.
But then there was pushback. Texas Senator John Cornyn tweeted many unanswered questions about proposed border adjustment tax. And South Carolina Republican Lindsey Graham wrote, any policy proposal which drives up costs of Corona, tequila, or margaritas is a big-time bad idea. Mucho sad. And then the White House started walking back the proposal, saying the tax rate would fall between 5 and 20%. And the tax is just part of a, quote, buffet of options, end quote. For more on all of this, let's bring in Steve Chaggaris and Molly Hooper in our Washington bureau. Steve is our CBS News senior political editor, and Molly Hooper is a congressional reporter for The Hill. All right, so Steve, let me start with you. Help us understand what happened on this subject of paying for the border wall.
Well, it's another example of what Republicans on the Hill are complaining of the Trump administration being sort of out of sync with what members of Congress are doing. And it's just, you know, the question is was this the administration floating an idea, or was it them just sort of shooting from the hip? I think it's probably the latter. We've seen examples of this over and over again, especially throughout the campaign with Trump, where he'll say something and it's just sort of an idea, and then there's backlash. And so you saw it today with this tax idea, where Spicer floated it, said it was just one idea, but then Republican members of Congress heard this and they started scratching their heads and they're saying, well, wait a minute. Are you going forward with this or are you not going forward with this? We saw this during the campaign with Muslim ban. We saw it with deportation force. It's one thing to do this on the campaign trail. You can sort of get away with morphing on your ideas. But I think what the Trump administration and Trump needs to understand is you can't just sort of shoot from the hip when you're governing now, because there are all these people on Capitol Hill who are looking for direction from you, and they're looking for coordination. They're looking to coordinate on a message and on policy. And if you're just sort of floating these ideas out there without telling anybody on the Hill, you just wind up confusing a lot of people. I think that's what happened today.
Well, speaking of looking for direction, Molly, let me ask you, congressional Republicans wanted some guidance and direction from the president at this conference. Do we know if they got it?
Well, it's unclear if they got it, but listening to the speech, it was very interesting because Donald Trump comes out, he's speaking to the House Republicans, the Senate Republicans, they have this great majority, and he basically gives the same kind of message that he did at the inauguration to the folks sitting right behind him, saying, listen, NAFTA was terrible, these politicians voted for it. I don't think any of you voted for it, or did you? And he was basically saying that you know, he was going to undo all these things that the GOP Congress has done. And he was giving Mitch McConnell a really tough time about, you know, not having the nominees approved. I'm going to meet with Theresa May, but without a Commerce Secretary because the Senate wasn't quick with the pen, as we saw in the previous clip. And though he was making digs during this whole speech, at one point, and this was actually kind of revealing, he said, you know, I was talking to Paul Ryan about this whole Obamacare thing, and I told them that why don't we just wait for 2 years and let it blow up? Let's not take any action. You know, politically, that would be much better for us. And I think my understanding from some folks in the room was people kind of looked around and thought, what is he talking about? Why is he even admitting this right now? So, you know, it's interesting because he's been so busy these past few days signing this, doing that. And here's the problem. He can't build a border wall unless Congress pays for it. He can't do any of these things unless Congress enacts it. You know, he can take the initial steps, but in terms of actually carrying out these actions, he's going to need congressional support, and it's not going to be on his timeline.
Right, and those were oh, go ahead, Steve.
I was just saying, it's fascinating to watch. Keep in mind, this is a guy who ran his own company for his entire adult life, and now he's become president of the United States, and he's not running his own company anymore. He has to listen to Congress. This isn't like a CEO of a business that has shareholders and that has a board to listen to. This is a guy, again, who worked by himself for decades, and so now he's going to adjust, and it's fascinating to watch this in real time because he's still doing this on his own.
Yeah,
and to hear the language he uses, especially during that speech when he said, you know, the Senate, those guys aren't quick with the pen. I'm thinking, quick with the pen. They vote. They don't have pens. They vote. And so that's a whole different thing. There's not just one pen. There's 100 pens. But it was also interesting to hear him talk about building, you know, I signed the Keystone. I signed the, you know, these pipes. He goes, you know, I found this clause. We want to make sure that they're all made in America. And then he talks about fabrication and all these things. He's a builder. He clearly is a builder. And just hearing him speak to this room full of politicians, it's fascinating to see, and fascinating is just the word, and entertaining for somebody like me who's covered Congress for so long. I can just imagine being in that room, you know, members of Congress listening to this guy thinking, oh my gosh.
But probably plays extremely well to the base, right? Those people that actually want some action taken, right? They see the images of him signing things, they hear him in those sound bites, and so for them, this is what are the first steps towards fulfilling his many campaign promises. All right, Steve, I have to turn to something else. Another chapter in the story of President Trump and inauguration numbers. The Washington Post reports he ordered the National Park Service director to provide photos that would disprove reports saying his attendance was below average. And in his Wednesday interview with ABC, as you know, he repeated his claim that he set an audience record. Take a listen.
A massive crowd of people. We had a crowd. I looked over that sea of people, and I said to myself, wow. And I've seen crowds before, big crowds. That was some crowd. When I looked at the numbers that happened to come in from all of the various sources, we had the biggest audience in the history of inaugural speeches.
All right, I want to get both your takes on this. Steve, what do you make of this?
Well, it's interesting. So if you listen to more of that interview, he said that the reason why he's fixated on this is because he wants to make sure that the people who supported him and the people who voted for him are not forgotten. That's the message he's trying to get across. Unfortunately for him, I think the message that's being received by a lot of people is that he's obsessed with this idea of crowd size. He's obsessed with this idea of proving to people that his election was legitimate. Look at let's look at Donald Trump's life, right? His life has been out there selling himself as a winner, right? He doesn't want himself to look like a loser. And so I think he feels that if these crowds aren't to a certain level, if they didn't beat other presidential inaugurals, or if his, for instance, the vote count, he lost the popular vote, and so that he was fixated on that for a while. Again, it all plays into this idea that Trump needs to be a winner, and he continues to sort of fan these flames. I'm just not sure that the message he's trying to get across is actually being received.
Molly, what do you think about that?
Well, it's not being received by the media. And the thing is the media has had a very interesting relationship with Donald Trump in particular, and we've seen that with Sean Spicer coming out, the press secretary, on the Saturday night to push back against this. He's going to be a counterpuncher, and when he thinks that he's being treated unfairly, he's going to take to Twitter, and he's going to expect that his press secretary goes out and counterpunches. And we saw that in the first press conference that Sean Spicer had on Monday. He wouldn't back down on certain assertions that Donald Trump had made. And, to be fair, Donald Trump his speech probably was seen by more people than President Obama's if you factor in the internet and you factor in the cable channels and whatnot. A lot of the people who supported Donald Trump probably can't, I hate to say this, they probably can't afford to make it to D.C. to see this. These are a lot of blue collar workers and whatnot who support him. So it's the optics that he's really fixated on. However, this introduces a different matter for Donald Trump, which runs runs into Congress, if he's asking the National Park Service to come in and to show different pictures, I mean, he's calling this guy up on a Saturday afternoon or Saturday morning and saying, come in here and fix this. Congress is going to be very aware of the actions that Donald Trump takes and times in which he tries to overstep his authority and pressure people who are in the federal government. And he really needs to be aware of that because, again, this is not his company. He does not run the company, and he will have congressional oversight, possibly aggressive oversight, because a lot of these people on Capitol Hill are not beholden to Donald Trump.
Molly, let me ask you, while we're on this subject, you mentioned the interesting relationship, I think is how you put it, between Donald Trump and the media. How does Steve Bannon fit into this? This is what he said on Wednesday, quote, "The media here is the opposition party and should keep its mouth shut." What do we understand from that, and how much of what we may be hearing from Donald Trump do you think is the voice of Steve Bannon?
I think that, frankly, I don't know Steve Bannon. I read Breitbart to keep up with what's going on in the White House almost. I don't think that the media is going to keep its mouth shut, and I don't think that Donald Trump is going to keep his mouth shut either. And I think that we all kind of feed off each other, and it's like whatever is reported and Donald Trump feels like is a slight, he's going to counterpunch. And I'm not quite sure what Steve Bannon meant by keep its mouth shut, because we're just reporting what's going on. And, a lot of times politicians don't feel like they're being treated fairly or reported on fairly. But a lot of politicians won't necessarily push back the way Donald Trump does. And so it'll be, again, interesting to see how this plays out. It's very entertaining if you stand back and look at it, because the media is not used to this, which is going to be interesting to see how we react.
Yes. Steve, your thoughts really quickly? We have only about a minute left.
Yeah, I mean, this is a low-risk political strategy for the Trump administration to go after the media, and we've seen, we're a punching bag for politicians on both sides. A lot of times, Republicans especially like to beat up on us, and this is just really sort of this on steroids, right? This is Trump continuing to hammer us. Now you get Steve Bannon taking it to another level. I mean, we're not going to change the way we do our jobs because of what Steve Bannon says, but if you look at it from a strategy standpoint, you look at the polling, and Americans don't think very highly of the media right now. So what's the risk for them to be bashing us? That's the way they look at it, at least.
Yeah. All right. Before I let you guys go, Steve, I want to congratulate you and Major Garrett on your new podcast, The Takeout. The second episode comes out Friday. If you haven't checked it out, you should really do so immediately. Corey Lewandowski was their first guest, and it was revelatory, I thought. Very interesting conversation. Congratulations to you, Shaggy. Steve
Thanks.
Chaggaris, Molly Hooper, thank you for your insight. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank
Elaine.
you.